I never expected a Tuesday evening in the bookstore to make me question everything I thought I knew about desire. I was shelving the new arrivals when she appeared by the philosophy section, leaning against the wooden counter like she owned the place without even trying. That first glance, it wasn't so much her beauty, though she had it, careful and understated, but the way she moved, deliberate but easy, that subtle command of space that made the air feel heavier, almost electric. Her name was Marin. My girlfriend's best friend. I knew her reputation, of course, sharp, a little untouchable, quick with a sarcastic smile, but none of that prepared me for the way my chest tightened the first time our eyes met. I tried to focus on the task at hand, lining up the books just so, but I couldn't stop noticing the way her fingers brushed the edges of the spines as she scanned the shelves, like she was touching knowledge, not books. I wanted to reach out, ask her a question, anything that would force me to exist in the same small world she occupied. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth, a little rough at the edges, and for a moment I forgot how to speak. She held a first edition copy of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, tracing the letters with a fingertip. "Do you know if there's a copy in the back?" Yeah, probably," I mumbled, fumbling for the barcode scanner. I wanted to tell her that I could walk her there myself, that I could follow her around the store just to see her smile again, but instead I led her to the narrow aisle, stepping aside as she passed. Our arms brushed, just lightly, accidental, but I felt it like an electric shock running up my shoulder. She glanced at me then, not in passing, but really looked, holding my gaze for a second too long. There was an unspoken weight there, a question hovering that neither of us dared speak aloud. I cleared my throat, trying to shift the moment into something mundane. "Here it is." She smiled, just a flicker, but it lingered. "Thanks." And then she added, almost in a whisper, "I always forget how quiet this place is, feels like you notice more than most." I froze. Notice more than most. It was just a sentence, but the way she said it, slightly teasing, slightly wary, made my stomach twist. She didn't just notice me, she was acknowledging that she had, too. Something unspoken passed between us in that quiet aisle, a weight, a possibility, a tiny spark that felt like it could ignite if we weren't careful. We moved to the register, her first edition tucked under her arm. I helped her with the transaction, but I kept stealing glances at her, watching her fingers curl around the edge of the counter, the way she leaned just slightly toward me as if gravity itself was trying to conspire with my own curiosity. There was a kindness in her gestures, small and deliberate, but it carried a tension that made me wonder if she had realized how dangerous it was for me to be standing there at all. As she left, she paused at the door, just for a moment, and our eyes met again. She didn't say anything, but her hand lingered near the doorframe as if leaving was the hardest thing to do. And in that pause, I felt it, the undeniable, quiet electricity that I couldn't name, the kind that burrows under your skin and refuses to leave. Walking back to the shelves, scanning the spines as if that could distract me, I kept seeing her in my mind, that half-smile, the brush of her hand, the tilt of her head. And I realized something terrifying and thrilling. I was going to think about that moment forever. The following Thursday, I found myself back at the bookstore under the guise of helping with inventory, though really I was waiting for a reason to see her again. Marin was there, perched on a tall ladder, scanning the top shelves with a calm efficiency that made me feel clumsy just standing beside her. "You don't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but measured when I offered to hold the ladder. Her eyes flicked toward me, just briefly, then returned to the shelf. She moved like someone used to people hovering, but not used to letting them in. I stayed still, pretending to organize the nearby stacks, though I couldn't stop noticing the way her fingers tightened around the rung, the slight arch of her back, the tiny sigh that escaped when she stretched too far. She was a fortress in motion, elegant and guarded, but with cracks that I could see if I leaned close enough. "Careful," I murmured, though not as a warning. More like a question, did she always handle everything like this, alone? She smiled faintly, a twitch at the corner of her mouth that didn't reach her eyes. "I've done this a lot," she said, but her voice wavered for the briefest second. I caught it. A hesitation. A small fracture in the otherwise controlled surface. I wanted to ask what it meant, wanted to lean closer and trace it like a line on a map, but I didn't. I just handed her a stack of books and watched her set them down carefully, almost reverently. She didn't notice, or pretended not to notice, how close my hand brushed hers. When she stepped down from the ladder, her hair fell forward, catching the dim fluorescent light, and I realized how tired she looked. Not just physically, though her shoulders slumped slightly, but the kind of tired that lives in your chest and leaves traces in your eyes. My stomach tightened, a strange mix of worry and fascination. "Thanks," she said again, quieter this time, almost to herself, as she adjusted a misplaced book. Her hands moved with precision, but the subtle shake betrayed something underneath. I couldn't stop noticing the little things, the way her laugh came slower than usual when a coworker cracked a joke, the way she licked her lips when she was thinking, the way her eyes flicked toward me for just a moment before darting away. She wasn't just tired, she was carrying something invisible, and I wanted, selfishly, to be the one she let see it. We lingered near the registers afterward, sorting receipts. Our shoulders brushed accidentally, or maybe intentionally, and I felt that quiet tension swell again, like the air itself was holding its breath. She didn't pull away. She didn't say anything. But her gaze lingered, just slightly, on my face, and I knew she knew I noticed everything. Then she did something small but entirely unplanned. She reached over and adjusted a crooked book in my hands, brushing her fingers against mine in the process. The touch was fleeting, but it left a charge that hummed under my skin long after she stepped back. "Careful," I whispered, more to myself than to her. She glanced at me, lips parted slightly, and for a heartbeat, there was something unspoken in her eyes, hesitation, recognition, maybe even curiosity. Then she turned away, just enough to leave me holding the weight of that tiny, electric moment. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was nearing closing time when she asked me to help carry a stack of books to the back room. Outside, rain streaked the windows, drumming a soft, irregular rhythm that made the fluorescent light inside feel harsher than usual. I followed her in silence, my hands brushing against hers more than once, neither of us acknowledging it. The room was cramped and quiet, except for the rain and the soft shuffle of boxes. She set down the books and leaned against the counter, a little too close, but neither of us moved. I wanted to step back. I wanted to close the distance that felt both unbearably short and impossibly wide. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly, voice low, like she was testing the air. I froze. "Leaving?" I repeated, trying to keep my tone neutral, calm. She nodded, her eyes tracing the lines of the stacked boxes instead of looking at me. "Just everything. Sometimes I feel like I'm stuck." The vulnerability in her voice hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't talking about books, or the job. I wanted to reach out, to put my hand on her arm, to tell her she wasn't stuck. But I didn't. I stayed silent, letting the pause stretch long enough for her to know I was listening. Our shoulders brushed as we reached for the same box at the same time. My heart skipped, and I thought maybe, for a moment, the world had shrunk to just that narrow, dimly lit room. She noticed, too. Her hand lingered near mine, a subtle hesitation, a tiny rebellion against the rules she'd built for herself. And then her phone buzzed, cutting through the moment like a knife. She glanced at it and stiffened, some ex, probably, or maybe a friend with bad timing. She muttered a quick excuse and stepped away, leaving me with the echo of what almost was. I told myself it was nothing, that I'd read too much into a brush of fingers, a glance that held too long, a sigh that meant more than words. But as I stacked the remaining books, I couldn't stop replaying the proximity, the warmth, the way her eyes had flicked toward mine before looking away. I wanted to say something, anything, but every sentence died in my throat. Every gesture seemed loaded, but careful. She came back, carrying a wet umbrella, shaking out the rain onto the mat, and I noticed how tired her shoulders looked, how the hair at her temple clung damply to her skin. "Thanks," she said softly, handing me the last box. There was no lightness in her voice tonight, just that low, almost quiet weight. For a moment, I considered it, leaning closer, letting her feel the heat in my chest, the tremor in my fingers. I imagined our hands brushing again, lingering, maybe a word escaping, something unguarded. I imagined her leaning in too, just enough, just barely, letting the rain and the cramped room and the late hour do the rest. But I didn't. I stayed back, my hand hovering over the box I'd just set down, watching her adjust the collar of her jacket. That almost moment hung between us like smoke, thick and unclaimed, leaving me aware of every unspoken thought I couldn't say, and every unacknowledged desire I couldn't act on. As she turned toward the door, umbrella in hand, I realized the ache of it would follow me home, and maybe, I thought, that ache was the only thing keeping me alive tonight. I found her in the back of the bookstore again, stacking returned books with a precision that made the room feel sterile, almost unbearably quiet. The storm from the night before had left puddles on the pavement outside, and the dim light overhead cast long shadows between the shelves. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should leave or stay, and she didn't look up. "Do you ever stop?" I asked finally, my voice quieter than I intended. She glanced at me, one eyebrow raised, a little wary. "Stop what?" Her tone was calm, measured, but I saw the edge of tension beneath it, the way her fingers paused on a book as if unsure whether to drop it or clutch it tighter. "Stop pretending," I said. "Everything, between us. This, whatever it is, pretending it's normal." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She took a slow breath and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. "I don't know if I can define it," she admitted finally, almost a whisper. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't raise it, didn't ask me to fix it. I wanted to cross the room, to reach for her hand, but my feet stayed planted. There was something in her silence that demanded more than a gesture, something that needed acknowledgement. "What are we doing?" I asked again, softer this time. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide and uncertain, and then she looked away, tracing the edge of a book spine. "I don't know," she said, and there it was, the vulnerability she didn't usually show, the quiet fracture beneath her confident exterior. I don't want to ruin anything." "Ruin what?" I asked, though I already knew. Her life, my life, the fragile balance of who she was supposed to be and what I'd come to mean in her quiet moments. We stood there, side by side, close enough for warmth, far enough that nothing would happen. I watched her fingers twist a corner of a paperback. She was strong, capable, and completely untouchable in the ways that mattered. Yet the air between us was taut, stretched over the questions we couldn't answer. "You think too much," she said finally, almost accusing, almost desperate, and I realized she wasn't scolding me, she was scolding herself. Her gaze dropped again, and for a moment, she looked smaller than she ever had before. "I can't stop," I admitted, voice barely above the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Not noticing you. Not thinking about this." She swallowed, a slight tremor in her jaw. "You shouldn't," she said, and it wasn't a command. It was a warning, to me, to herself, to whatever was quietly growing between us. We didn't move, didn't touch. The silence stretched longer than any word could, heavy with all the things we were too afraid to name. Every glance, every pause, every almost confession weighed more than any touch ever could. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if testing the truth, "I don't want this." Her words hung between us like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I felt the same, that it wasn't wrong, but the truth would only make the air heavier. Instead, I nodded once, slowly, the ache settling into my chest like a stone, and watched her return to the shelves, fragile, guarded, and impossible to reach. I didn't expect her to call me that evening. The bookstore was closed, lights off, the rain tapping faintly against the windows. I had just started putting my jacket on when my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and my chest tightened before I even answered. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, though it came out softer than I intended. Can I come by?" Her voice was tentative, unfamiliar in a way that made me sit back down immediately. There was a pause, a swallowed breath, and then, "I need to see you." When she arrived, she didn't knock. She leaned against the doorframe, damp hair sticking to her neck, eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept. I gestured her inside, trying to keep my own trembling in check. I never told anyone this," she said quietly once we were sitting, her fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "Not even her?" "Not really." She swallowed, and I realized I wasn't meant to interrupt, just to listen. "Go on," I said. She exhaled slowly. "I lost someone. A long time ago. Someone I thought I'd always have. And I never forgave myself for what happened. I can still feel it sometimes, like it's lodged in my chest." Her hands tweezed, the knuckles white against the fabric. I wanted to reach across and hold them, but I didn't. I just sat there, silently, letting her words sink in. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly, almost apologetically. "Not exactly, but the way you notice things, the way you linger on details, the patience you have, it's like seeing him again, only different." My stomach flipped. Different. That one word carried hope and danger, warmth and warning all at once. I swallowed hard, trying to process the weight behind it. "I shouldn't be saying any of this," she continued, her voice a whisper now. "I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't feel this." I could feel her tension, the way she folded herself inward, bracing against some invisible storm. My own heart ached with the quiet power of her admission, the honesty that wasn't a confession of us, exactly, but a confession of her, flawed, scared, real. For a long while, we just sat there. The clock ticked somewhere behind the shelves, but it felt irrelevant. I watched her, noticed the way her shoulders slumped when she exhaled, the slight trembling of her hands, the faint curve of her lips when she tried not to cry. Then she handed me a small envelope, almost absent-mindedly, like it had appeared in her bag and now had a reason to exist. I opened it. Inside was a photograph, a younger version of her, smiling with someone I didn't know, his arm around her shoulder. The ache in my chest was sudden, visceral, as if the image had struck some hidden chord. "I don't know why I'm giving this to you," she admitted, eyes downcast. "Maybe so you understand. Maybe so you know why I hesitate." I didn't speak. I just held the photo, feeling the quiet gravity of everything she hadn't said, everything she had carried alone. She looked at me then, a fragile, almost desperate openness in her gaze. "I don't want to ruin anything, but I also can't pretend it doesn't matter." And in that soft, seismic moment, the space between us seemed to shift. Everything unspoken, everything dangerous, suddenly felt both inevitable and terrifying. I found her in the bookstore the next evening, quiet and still among the shelves, the scent of old paper thick in the air. The storm from earlier in the week had left everything damp and clean-smelling, and for the first time, it felt like the world had slowed down just for us. She looked up as I entered, and we shared a long, wordless glance. No flirtation, no teasing, just recognition. The kind of acknowledgement that says, "I see you, and I don't need to hide anymore." "Hey," I said softly, and she nodded, her lips curving in that small, guarded smile I'd come to memorize. "Hey," she replied, and for a moment we didn't speak again. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, weighted with all the things we hadn't said but had been carrying in each stolen glance, each brush of a hand, each shared laugh that lingered too long. I moved to the counter, pretending to sort through receipts, but my eyes kept drifting toward her. She caught me looking and didn't turn away. Instead, she adjusted a stack of books, then set her hand down lightly near mine. My fingers twitched. It was such a small thing, a brief, almost accidental contact, but it was enough. Enough to break down the walls we'd been building around ourselves. "I'm tired," she admitted after a long pause, her voice low and honest. Of pretending nothing matters." I didn't respond with words. I simply shifted closer, letting our shoulders brush. She didn't pull away. The warmth of her presence felt inevitable, like gravity finally winning, like all the tension and hesitation had finally been allowed to rest somewhere. We sat together on a low shelf bench, knees nearly touching, hands grazing in quiet acknowledgement. She leaned her head slightly toward me, not fully, but enough that I could feel the weight of her trust, the soft heat of her hair brushing against my arm. I reached out, fingertips brushing hers, tentative, not demanding. She responded with the same careful patience, a quiet invitation without words. For a long time, we stayed like that. No confessions, no declarations of love. Just space shared, breaths mingling, and the deep understanding that this, whatever this was, had become something we couldn't ignore. She finally whispered, "I think I'm done fighting it." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The brush of her fingers against mine, the subtle weight of her leaning closer, and the quiet way our world had shrunk to just this moment said everything that words could never capture. And in that stillness, the bookstore, the rain-streaked windows, the scent of old books, and the dim light became our refuge. Not perfect, not fairy tale, but ours earned, inevitable, human. I closed my eyes for a second, letting it all settle. She didn't move. Neither did I. And for the first time, I didn't feel the ache of longing or the pull of restraint. Just quiet, finality, and the gentle certainty that this, whatever it was between us, was exactly where we were supposed to be. It's been months since that night in the bookstore, the one that quietly shifted everything. I still find myself walking past the philosophy section sometimes, just to see how the light falls on those shelves, or to remember the subtle weight of her hand brushing against mine. Looking back, I realize what changed wasn't just the surface of our relationship, it was the way we allowed ourselves to notice, to really see each other. She, who had carried her past in tight, guarded motions, learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. And I, who thought I was merely observing, discovered the patience to wait for something fragile to bloom. We didn't leap into love with grand declarations or reckless abandon. It was slower, quieter, more earned. A glance became a conversation, a touch became a comfort, a shared silence became understanding. Every day was a small choice, and each choice was a proof that we could hold each other without needing to rush or define everything at once. I notice her differently now. The faint laugh that comes after she remembers something small, the way her shoulders relax when she thinks no one is watching, the little sighs that mark moments of triumph or relief. And she notices me, the way I linger in hallways, the quiet gestures that say more than words ever could, the way I try to keep her safe from the weight of her own past. Love, I learned, isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's the tiny, almost imperceptible things, the brush of fingers as we pass, the shared coffee on a rainy morning, the long, knowing pauses that say more than speech ever could. And sometimes, it's the courage to admit you want something you're scared to take. I still catch myself thinking of that first night, how the air felt heavier, how the world contracted to a narrow aisle, how the spark between us had been so tentative and yet so undeniable. It's funny, in a way, how something that started in small, awkward moments grew into the quiet certainty that this, her, me, us, was something worth holding. We're still flawed. Still learning. Still cautious. But there's a warmth now that wasn't there before, an understanding that what we have doesn't need to be loud to be real. And every time I look at her, I feel it, the quiet collapse into something enduring, something human, something that has changed both of us. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?